Dear friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Nitesh Goyal from DAV College, Chandigarh. I am going to present before you the ninth module titled Research Problem under the paper Tourism and Hospitality Research. The module will cover the following topics: the introduction, defining the research dilemma, what is a research problem, selecting the problem, necessity of defining the problem, the techniques involved in defining a problem, finally, the summary. Dear friends, after the completion of this module, you will be able to apprehend and appreciate the importance of research problem, importance of defining a research problem precisely and accurately, and also to cognize and learn the tools for defining research problem under scrutiny. Friends, let's start with the topic by understanding the research dilemma first. Selecting and elucidating a research problem is one of the most important steps while carrying out any research process or an activity. A researcher must try to identify the research problem and properly define it so that it becomes easier to carry on the research process efficiently and effectively. For the proper understanding of the problem, a researcher must find out about the problem to be undertaken. If a problem is not well understood, it will lead to undesirable results and will eventually end in some wrong direction. Let's now understand what is the research problem. It is basically the first step in the process of carrying out a research activity. Generally, a research problem refers to a dilemma a researcher comes across while passing through any situation and looks for a suitable solution. In other words, the main purpose behind defining the research problem is to find the answers to the unanswered questions that a researcher may come across while carrying on the research. Any individual or an organization are expected to face a problem is only when an individual has no idea about the best course of action. Thus, recognition of a problem in right terms is a requisite for carrying out any research activity. It is a kind of a problem wherein a researcher is required to find an appropriate solution to the undersigned problem. Thus, the researcher is required to find out the most compatible solution to a problem. That is, to find the most appropriate answer to the problem being confronted. There can be various factors, thereby making the problem more complex in nature. There might be some other factors too, which are also likely to cause changes in the area of research, all of which may have an effect on the situation itself or may change the efficacies of the problems. All such elements may be thought of in context of a research problem. The main purpose behind a problem statement is to, first, make the researcher known to the importance of the research study. The reader is best known to the significance of the study and the research questions, hypotheses or assumptions to follow. Place the topic into a particular context that defines the parameters of what needs to be investigated. Further, to provide the framework for the reporting the results and indicates what is probably required to conduct the study and explain how the findings would present this information. The logicality behind a good research statement. A good problem statement gets started by introducing the broad area in which one's research will revolve around, positioning the reader to the more explicit issues that his research investigation is directed to. The statement should not be too lengthy, but a good research problem should have the following features. Number 1, a fascinating topic. A general interest or eagerness is not a sufficient reason to undertake any research activity because it does not truly justifies its importance. The problem that one has chosen to direct his research towards must not only be satisfying one's own requirements, but also its relevance must also be felt academically or socially. That could have an impact on the nearby surrounding environment. The problem chosen must be one that motivates us to address it so as to contribute towards the society. Secondly, it supports multiple contexts. The problem must be put up in such a manner that avoids splitting but instead supports the verification and exploration of multiple perspectives. Just like the rule of thumb in the social sciences is that a good research problem is the one that would be able to get hold of viewpoints from a wide variety of audience made up of genuine people. Third, the research ability. It is very well agreed that the world that exists around us is not real, but it represents an important criteria of creating a good research statement. It may seem normal, but one may find himself in the midst of investigating a complicated research project and realize that you don't have enough prior research data to draw inferences from your analysis. There is no problems wrong with original research, but the research problem that is chosen can be matched in some way by the resources available to us. Now, the question comes in mind is how to select the problem. The problem taken up for the study should be chosen with due care and diligence. The task of selecting a problem involves a lot of effort. Every researcher must set his level of commitment for the problems to be probed into for research purposes. A problem must be an original one. Thus, a guide should be the only help one can expect in choosing a research problem. It basically involves the structuring and framing of a problem by focusing on specific targets and laying emphasis on critical variables. However, the points which need one's attention while selecting the research problems are subject which has already been drilled and exposed much already should not be normally chosen, as it may lead to repetition only, making it difficult to introduce new dimensions. Second, problem involving too much ambiguity should be avoided. Number 3, the problem initiated for research should be such that it could be aptly undertaken as a research problem within the available resources. Number 4, the relevance of the subject taken for research purposes and its associated costs, etc. are some of the few other criteria that must be given due consideration while examining a problem. Some of the questions that must have answers are like: one is competent enough to execute the research activity? Does the topic of research meet the financial constraints? Whether he or she, that is, the researcher, would be able to obtain the necessary cooperation from those who participate in research as respondents, thereby setting everything in coordination? Does the problem involve practical approach towards the research problem under study? Do the problems hold relevance in today's times or not? If the answers to all the above questions are in the affirmation that he or she has an answer to it, feasibility and accuracy of the research can be tested. Next is, the researcher must conduct a preliminary study before the selection of research problem. This may not be a prerequisite where problem requires carrying out of any research activity or a problem. If the area chosen for the research is vast and one is not equipped with the required resources, sneak a peek be done into the topic. The study undertaken with the research perspective is selected by giving due consideration to all its related aspects. The results can never go in wrong direction, rather yield fruitful results. The problem selected must have complete involvement of the researcher and must show his complete dedication towards the research activity, thereafter leading to achievement of research goals which have been set previously. Friends, let us now understand the necessity of defining the problem. As explained earlier also, a problem well defined is problem half solved. This statement gives high weightage to the importance of clearly stating the problem under study. The research problem which is under the investigation must be defined so clearly as it helps to remove any kind of ambiguity or any kind of vagueness. The problem to be investigated or probed into needs to be comprehended clearly, examined to segregate useful data from within the whole lot of data. Formulation of research problem allows the investigator to remain focused irrespective of the hurdles coming in between. What kind of data is required? What should be the nature or the characteristic that the data to be investigated must hold? How to establish cause and effect relationship between its variables for the research purposes? Which statistical or scaling techniques should be used for the purpose underlying? There may be many other questions that bothers an investigator who needs to plan his strategy and execute it in a proper manner in order to find out suitable solutions to kinds of research questions elucidated, which is only then possible if the problem under scrutiny is illustrated properly. Therefore, understanding of the problem in right context is a necessity for any research proposal. It is rightly said that formulation of a problem in the right context holds much importance than obtaining the solutions to it. Since this depends on thorough description and understanding of the issues involved, then only it is possible to perform the research operation and therefore effectively proceed further with the research activity in process. Formulation of a research problem in a righteous manner is very important. Research in its initial stages begins with the initiation of the research problem. It gives an idea as to how to proceed further during the research operation. Research is a process which inherently requires an activity completion in a sequential manner. It helps the researcher to formulate that sequence and also helps to eliminate irrelevant steps during the research operations. The formulation of research problem is the first step in carrying out a research study. It helps to understand the research procedure in more appropriate manner. Most beginners during the initial stages of research think that it is an easy task to formulate, but this too requires great effort and dedication on the part of the researcher. A research problem is basically a generalized statement that could be solved using research procedures, techniques, and methods. In reality, the rationale behind the formulation of the research problem is to determine the objective and intention of the researcher, in the absence of which the research may prove to be futile. Research helps us in the identification of the purpose behind the research activity, the study design, the sampling strategy, research instrument, and analysis and interpretation. Further, the problem undertaken to carry out the research should be clear enough in the mind of the researcher, as many other questions crop up during the process of research. In the absence of a clear and well-defined research problem, it may lead to fallacious conclusions. In addition to this, the problem to be researched upon must be complete in itself to grab his attention, so that he completely devotes himself towards the achievement of the objectives. The passion of the researcher in conducting the research matters a lot in the whole process of research. Further, success of a research depends much on if it can be managed within the limits, or else it would be impossible to reach towards the objective effectively. We should take due care of the available physical and financial resources in order to obtain at the right conclusion and reach towards the meaningful results. Friends, let us now throw some light on the techniques involved in defining a problem. Defining a research question properly involves the task of clearly defining the limits within which a researcher shall pursue his research study, keeping a predetermined view of the problem under the study. Defining a research problem is a tedious job. However, It is a kind of a job that must be handled diligently to remove the scope of any confusion that may arise during the research activity. Usually, the researcher should confront or challenge himself with a question before framing a research hypothesis. But this kind of an approach may not be able to deliver definite results, since the question framed in such a scenario is based on assumptions which may not be suitable from the testing purposes. Correct framing and interpretation of the research problem is again a crucial part of a research study and must not be completed in a hurry. However, in practice, this aspect of research problem is generally overlooked, which in turn leads to a lot of problem in the upcoming stages of the research. Therefore, the problem undertaken should be explored in such a manner that due respect is provided to each of its related aspects. The technique of defining the research problem clearly involves different steps like generalization, the nature of problem, literature review, the conclusions, the research problem proposition. Let's take them one by one. Generalization. Here, the idea is to follow a generalized approach while presenting the problem in a general way scientifically. To carry out this activity smoothly, the researcher must plunge or involve himself thoroughly in the subject matter. For example, as in the case of pursuance of any research activity, it becomes imperative to conduct a field survey, and the researcher may further carry on preliminary survey known as a pilot survey. The researcher can illustrate the problem under someone's guidance or can be kept in front of a subject expert who can assist us in the completion of the task. It is often seen that the expert defines the problem in a generalized manner and in the end hand it over to the researcher to modify and ultimately turning the research problem to its conclusion. The problem stated in a generalized sense may contain vagueness, which needs to be solved by giving a thought process and rethinking over the problem if the need arises. In the meantime, the feasibility study of the underlying problem has to be kept in mind while describing the problem in detail. The second is the nature of the problem. The next step in illustrating the problem is to test its originality and relevance in today's context. The best way to bring this into existence is when the problem is discussed with those who first raised it or with some subject expert in order to find out how the problem was originally conceived and with what were its underlying objectives. If the researcher has stated the problem himself, he should reconsider all those aspects that motivated the researcher to make a generalized statement concerning the problem. For the in-depth clarity about the nature of the research problem, the researcher can enter into a debate with the subject experts who have the core knowledge about the subject in consideration. The researcher should also keep in mind the kind of environment within which the problem is going to be studied and understood so that it may not lead to fallacious conclusions in the end. Third, the literature review. It consists of reviewing all available literature related to the problem at hand. Reviewing may include examination of the existing related literature. This will help the researcher to become familiar with all the relevant theories in the same field. The literature may include books, journals, newspapers, reports, and records, etc. The researcher must devote sufficient time in reviewing the researches that have already been undertaken in the respective field. This kind of activity is done to find out what kind of data types is available for execution purposes. Having the knowledge of what kind of data types are available often helps minimize the problem as well as help in removing the complexity of the technique that might be used. The main purpose of reviewing existing literature is to find out if there exist certain gaps in the theories which have already been developed or the existing theories which are available at our disposal are inconsistent with each other? Are the findings of the identified studies follow a pattern consistent with the theoretical expectations, and so on? All this helps the researcher to move further in the field of extension of knowledge. That is, the researcher can start initiating, making a strong foundation with the help of an existing premise. Various studies on the same subject have also proved to be useful for indicating the difficulties that may be encountered in the present study, and not only this but also the possible analytical shortcomings. At times, such studies may prove their relevance and be useful during the execution of a research process. Fourth, the research problem proposition. In the end, the researcher should be able to convert the research problem into a working proposition. When the characteristics or the nature of the problem have been developed, the surrounding environment or the situation within which the problem needs to be studied should have been appropriately and accurately defined. It should be made very sure that the researcher goes through the available literature with the reference to the problem under study. Then, it becomes comparatively easier to rephrase the problem into simpler terms. Through rephrasing, the research problem comes to specific conclusion in order to make it operationally effective, which in turn helps in the development of working proposition. The points which should be given due consideration during the execution of the research problem is: first, the technicality of the terms and the abbreviations should be properly defined. Secondly, the underlying inferences behind the research problem should be clearly defined. Thirdly, there should be a predefined criteria that should have already been set before defining the research problem. Fourthly, the factors like time period, the data sources must be given due consideration while carrying out any research activity. The constraints confining the boundaries of a problem should be highlighted when defining a research problem. Dear friends, let us now summarize the module. Exploration and clearly stating the research is the most critical step of the research journey. A research problem refers to some sort of a trouble that a researcher comes across while passing through any situation and looks for a suitable solution for the same. Thus, research problem must be selected with utmost care, diligence, although it seems as an easy task. The technique of defining the research problem has following steps. That is, the generalization, the nature of the problem, the literature review, the conclusion and the working proposition. Thank you.